Good evening. This is Faith Matters, and I am David Hennessy. There are moments in life when things seem very dark. Times when illness, financial difficulties, rejection, divorce, bereavement can bring us to the point of just not wanting to go on, even to the point of contemplating suicide. Today, I have with me on the line from Tralee, County Kerry, a man who suffered tremendously in so many ways, suffering that brought him to the brink of death by suicide. His name is Brendan Walsh. Hello, Brendan. It's great to have you on the line from faraway Kerry, where the mountains are greener and the grass is greener, and maybe the most beautiful county in all Ireland, except for Wexford.
Well, that is great. I'd agree with that. I like Wexford too. I'm very fond of Wexford over the years, David.
So you've saved yourself there now, Brendan. That's the word.
I had some good friends in Wexford.
That's great, Brendan. That's great. Look, would you tell us your story, Brendan?
Oh, yes. Well, my story is, it's no more remarkable than anybody else's, except for the fact that it was rather dramatic. My own conversion story was dramatic. There are many people that have a story like mine that is not as dramatic as mine. And so the drama that shouldn't take away from anybody else's blessing in the conversions that they had. But most certainly, yeah, I was born into a family of seven, lovely family. My father was working as an engineer, and my mother was a very social, lovely woman. She was a member of the Legion of Mary. We had four sisters and two brothers. And we had a very, from my understanding of it, because I was quite young, when my mum died, my understanding of our family was that it was a really nice family, lovely family. And of course we were pretty well okay in every way. And then what happened is that in 1959, my mother died of cancer. And that just basically was like setting off a bomb in our home, really. It just absolutely upscuttled the ship. And my father loved her very much, loved my mother very much, and took her death really badly, very badly. He began to change as a person, really, and he became very insulated within himself and isolated to us, really. And his anger grew inside of him. Socially, he was a very acceptable man. He was very, very well thought of and very acceptable. But internally, in the home, he became very angry. And that anger just spilled over upon us children, really. And, to the point where my sisters had to leave after a period of time. They all left to be farmed out to my aunts and so on. And mainly they just couldn't handle it too much. And my brother and I, and my older brother had left because he had been 17 when my mum died. And my other brother, Brian, he was 2 years older than me. And I had a little sister who was born just not too long before my mother died. She was also taken to my aunt's. So my father and my brother and I, Brian, lived with my father for those years. It was a horrendous lifestyle. He rarely ever spoke unless you had something sensible to speak about. If it wasn't practical and if it didn't make sense, then he could be in real big trouble. So he was a man that expected you to learn. He told us that God did not exist, that life was about learning and being successful and nothing less than that. He never followed through with any kind of affection or anything of that nature. So he would, in a matter of fact, become very violent. And there were times when we were so nervous of his temper that our lives was a constant life of tension in the home, and I mean that he was not a heavy drinking man or anything like that. He just had this something inside of him would just trigger It could be a wrong look. It could be something stupid that he would have considered it stupid that we said. It could be a chore that had been not done or something. And he could just go very violent. And he would punch like a man. And, very often even I was knocked unconscious.
Oh my God.
My older brother was more timid. I had been some way toughened in myself, but from a young age, I just took it. And eventually, the wonderful thing about children is that they're so willing to forgive. I was 4. I was just 5, going on 5 when my mother died.
Oh dear.
And I could immediately sense and feel that tension in our home. And we lived in that. We went to school, and nothing was ever spoken of outside of the home because it was just so private. Socially, my father was just absolutely. They loved him. Everybody loved him. But in the home, you had that. It was like eternity. It was just awful, and we felt every second of it. I often thought about it again when I was look back at my life, and often said, Lord, I don't think I could go through that kind of pain ever again in my lifetime. If I had thought I had to do that all over again, I would prefer to go, And so that's how the tension was there. He was a good man. He did try his very best to take care of us all. He just hadn't the ability to tolerate or to have patience of any kind, and he didn't like that. He expected everything from you, but invested nothing in you in terms of emotions or feelings or praise or anything. There was never any praise, really, never. It was always, you always fell short, my father, and so you had to try harder and harder. And that was the atmosphere in the early years of my life. And so I became hardened to that. And eventually what happens is that you become so hard, especially with physical violence, physical pain, that you just don't feel it anymore. And you don't know why you don't feel it, you just don't. And
you mean
that's how
even internally you didn't feel it, like
no,
sad?
I just went cold, and everything was cold to me, and that was I can actually recall as a child. I remember going to school. I remember being very rebellious in school. And there's a terrible word, I think, that sometimes happens to people, and I think it's awful. I actually was fearless, and it's a great tragedy to be fearless.
Yes.
And so my school time, the idea of rebellion in school didn't the punishment, which was corporal punishment at the time, didn't really bother me at all. It just added to my internal, I'd say, more or less, I began to develop a real hatred for people, and authority, most especially too.
Yes.
And
yes.
I had that awful hatred for it, and it turned out that I began to just hate everybody, and I was hurting other people too. I mean, I fought. I was in fights and arguments, and I hurt people, and I fought people, and physically fought them. And that was a release for me, I suppose. And I wouldn't have been able to identify it as that then, but it most certainly would have been release. And it was a tragedy, really.
Yes.
For a young life to be so caught up in the tension of hatred and spite, and at such a young age, when you even though you were fed a cultural you had a cultural feed that was coming in, but there's no way you could ever appreciate it because of the scars of that violence,
When you say cultural feed, what do you mean, Brendan?
Well, my father was a cultured man. He liked us to appreciate things, and
okay.
And in life and things like that, and art and everything. He had that. He had all of it.
Art, poetry, music.
Yeah, and he would hand us books, and he'd hand me books by Yeats, he'd hand me books by all kinds of books, and he'd say, "Read that, and I'll question you later." That was all.
Wow.
So I got a good feed of Irish writers.
And did you take to that? Was that?
I did. I did enjoy it. I did enjoy the Irishness. Yeats now maybe not as much, but like in other writers, I did enjoy them. I enjoyed the plays at the time, and I enjoyed it.
Sing, I suppose. And
Joyce. Was a big.
Wow. To enjoy Joyce is quite an achievement.
Yeah, that even at a young age it was. Yeah, I thought it was scandalous, and so. But these, and then he would give me things like Henry Thoreau's Walden Pond, and
yes, oh yes,
and he expected me just to soak in the culture of it all, and without having the conversation really. So it was very solid. It was done in a lot of solitude.
And how did your relationship with your father continue or develop?
Well, I kept. You had to keep a certain distance from him, and you had to keep. He expected stuff to happen with you, and if it didn't, you just had to avoid him. I mean, there were times when I went missing from my home, when I had to sleep in a shed or something, if his temper was up. And I wouldn't be able to return for a couple of days,
Good God. And what would happen when you'd return?
Well, when I'd return then, he'd normally get a bit nervous about it, and I wouldn't see him. He'd be gone in the morning. I'd see him in the evening late. I'd be in later and just avoid him as much as possible. That was unless he actually came looking for you, which was it. No, he wasn't a tyrant. It's very hard for me to explain that. It's kind of, he was a man that just could not hold back his temper from us, but he could socially, he could absolutely be a wonderful man.
Good God.
To everybody else.
And how did you want to get away from the house? Did you try and escape? Did you run away?
I did. When I came, as years went by, my father sent me away to college, and I came back the first year, and I refused to go back there again. And he washed his hands of me, and I was just young then. I was coming on 13, 14.
And you refused to go back to you went to a boarding school, I suppose.
Yes, I did. Yeah, and I refused to go back because of there was an attempted molestation of me in that school, and I could not share that with my father. Like that's the kind of man he was. I could not share that with him, and he felt that I had missed a great opportunity in my life, and that he went to great trouble to arrange.
And expense, of course.
And expense, yeah. And so he just basically just washed. He said, "I just washed my hands of you." He
actually said that to you.
Yeah, he said you're absolutely. He said, you're such to throw away an opportunity like that. You're such an idiot, and I just washed my hands of you. And he did, and basically that's exactly what he did. So the next thing I found myself, I lost interest in everything. The bottom fell out of my world, even though it wasn't great at the time. But I lost interest in everything, and before I knew it, we were in the 60s then, and you had the developments of the hippie movement and the freedom that was beginning to come in through all the various kinds of rock music and everything that was coming in. And I made some friends who had actually come to my town, and they were from England, and they were very hippie-ish type of people.
Yeah.
And they were very gentle, and I got to meet them, and I was hanging around with them a bit, and before I knew it, they had me smoking hashish and stuff like that. And what I noticed about them, more than any drug or anything like that, is that I noticed that were showing me incredible respect. And
yes, there was that mixture of things. I remember it so well. The flower children.
You do, don't you?
I was in San Francisco at the time, and wow,
yes,
it was quite an amazing scene.
Yes, it was, and that's the kind of atmosphere I went into, and it was here, and they knew nothing about that really here at the time. It was kind of new, and but I got into them, and before I know it, we were taking all kinds. They were giving me all kinds of drugs, and it was a very interactive movement, and very free, no inhibitions whatsoever within that, and they were older than me, most of them. Some of them well educated, who had already dropped out of college and so on. And our discussions were deep and drugged, of course, and deep.
Yes.
Our attitude was that it's a beautiful world, and maybe we can go somewhere and just do something wonderful outside to some other country or something. And it went from sort of soft drugs to the LSD and all this kind of stuff that was going on.
Yes.
And eventually they disappeared. They just left. And I found myself at 15 years of age. I found myself on my own. It was incredible. Nobody in town really would have known too much about it. I had one friend, but he had already died from drugs.
An Irish friend?
Yeah.
Oh
in my town, and he had died. He got sick and died, while he was asleep. And the thing about it was that I was left with the idea of what am I going to do now, and I just feel so lost here. And so I packed my bag at 15 years of age, and I headed for London. And I got a place to stay in Islington in London.
Excuse me, what did your dad say when you left?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing at all.
No
nothing
goodbye, no hugs?
No goodbye, nothing. I think he was kind of half relieved. I felt at the time anyway that he might have been relieved, but I took off. And at the time, I had two sisters in London, and when I went over there, I went looking for a job. So it was easy to get a job then because you could pose as an 18-year-old and so on like that. So I went down and I got a job. I was only 15. I got a job working in King's Cross for a Jewish firm that actually made rat poisons. Would you believe it? And and I made some contacts there. And eventually I was spending all of my money on drugs. All of my wages were going on drugs. And I was taking stuff I was taking. I didn't even realize, half of what I was doing. I was so stupefied. And I used to go to this basement every weekend and spend the whole weekend in the basement, just sitting at the wall with other people. And
you were on the way to dying.
I really was, and it really didn't matter to me at all. Would you believe it? That I felt I was dead anyway, but it wasn't that death was on my mind or anything. And so eventually, what happened was that I tried to get up one morning, and when I would go to work, there was an elderly man. They put me into the stores, and there was an elderly man working there, and he made an armchair out of some boxes for me, and he would sit me there, and he'd actually feed me his own sandwiches, and so I was kind of wearing away, but I tried to get up one morning then, and my legs wouldn't move, and I was so fortunate. And we talk about providence and how it works, but my sister came to visit, and found me in that state, and so I was returned to Ireland straight away, and I spent 9 months then coming off those drugs, and during that 9 months it was horrendous, really, and it was a very depressing time, and I'd probably get depressed to the point where I would freeze. I couldn't even make facial gestures, really.
Oh, God.
And it was so dark. And eventually I came out anyway, and I was okay. I came out of it, and my father came to me, and he said to me, I was 17 then, he said, you're an embarrassment to me. He said, if I could arrange for you, he said, to go into the army, would you do it? And you know how after drugs you're kind of a bit stupefied in your mind, and I kind of nodded and said, yeah, thinking that that's not on. Like, everything was about peace.
Yeah, yeah.
But he shipped me up to Limerick, and I ended up in this Sarsfield barracks in Limerick, and this doctor was examining me. And as he was examining me, I said to myself, that's the end of that anyway. There's no way I'm going to pass this thing anyway. But I did. He passed me.
You passed the physical.
I passed the physical. I could not believe it. And very shortly after, I found myself being transported to Clonmel and to this military barracks in Clonmel, where I did my basic training. And it was a tough, tough place. And I found myself with this gun in my hand. I said, what am I doing here? And the next thing was that this particular sergeant, he was Sergeant Perry, he was a lovely sergeant and a tough man. He had been in the Congo and everything. And he kind of took me on. And I don't know what arrangements were made, but he basically beat the daylights out of me every morning at the gym. And before after a period of time, something snapped. And I got that sharpness. I was a bit sharp. And sure, I was getting fitter and fitter. And the discipline of the army was absolutely what I needed. And I excelled in it and really did very, very well. I loved the fitness. I loved becoming alive again in myself. And I loved the army at that time. So
and you had no longing to go back to the drugs or anything like that?
I had absolutely none whatsoever. It's quite the opposite, actually. I wanted to do every course that was available within the army, and I wanted to, any fitness area at all. I did my duties in the north. I did my duties in all over the place, and I was part of all kinds of groups and so on. And eventually, they sent me to the Middle East. Then when I was 19, they sent me to Cyprus first, and then they sent me from Cyprus. We went to an emergency force to Cairo. And from Cairo across Ismailia, down to Ismailia, and from Ismailia across the Suez Canal into the Sinai. And in the Sinai, we went to a place called El Arish, where we set up a buffer zone between the Egyptians and the Israelis. The Yom Kippur War had just been completed at the time.
1966.
1973.
73. The Yom Kippur War. Yeah.
Yeah, the Yom Kippur. And so it was we spent 7 months there. And when I came back, the strange thing, everything was really in my favor. I was going to do further studies, just about to do further studies. And one morning I was walking across the square and I fell. I just actually fell unconscious. When I woke up, I was very, very sore. And I noticed that my muscles and everything were really, really tense, and I was in a daze. But I put it down to the fact that I was so fit, and that I might have been in need of vitamins or something like that. And but it kept happening, kept falling down.
Oh God!
And eventually, I noticed that I was getting a little buzz in my ear, So when I would get the buzz in my ear, I would go for a place of cover where people wouldn't see me because I knew I was going to go. And but of course, eventually I was found out, and I was sent to Cork Military Hospital. And there they did testing on me. Dr. Noel Callahan, he was a neurologist at the time. He did the various tests on me, and from there, then they said I was suffering with grand mal epilepsy.
You were suffering from what?
Grand mal epilepsy, which is a form of epilepsy whereby it's like for all just to make it simple, it's like taking a positive and a negative wire and putting them together, and you get a short circuit, and that's what was happening in my brain, in my nervous system. So you just fell into a kind of a fit state where you'd be out of control, and your muscles would be out of control and so on, and you would be out of consciousness as well.
Terrifying.
So he said, "You're 19 years of age." He said, "Because this is happening to you at 19, you're going to have this for the rest of your life." And that just absolutely, I can honestly say that was I felt at that time, the anger came up in me so much, was so that just, I loved this military thing. I loved it. And now I realized that it was over. And just another slap of bad fate happening to me again. And so I really did suffer a lot when he told me that, because I couldn't handle any weapons anymore or anything of that nature. And so I left. I came out of there, came back to my town, and I decided, well, I listened to my father, and he said, be successful. So the only ambition that I had from then on was to make money.